start this off to our CCL training program. It's a weekly webinar series of citizens climate lobbies that provide CCL supporters like you and I with access to in-depth training opportunities on topics related to climate change and effective climate advocacy. I'll be your host tonight. My name is Brett Cease, and what we're going to be doing is diving into and exploring CCL's Transformational Organizing Guide. In CCL, we transform what people think is possible for Congress to do on climate change. And in the process, we transform what people think is possible for themselves as well to accomplish. Regardless of the motivation or skills a person brings when they join CCL, we succeed when we help them take that next step in growing as part of our movement. And because an empowered volunteership helps us reach our big organizational goals, tonight we're going to be hosting a training that walks volunteers through this Transformational Organizing Guide, describes its background and the 5 pillars by which we've built it, that each help us strengthen our leadership development and capacity throughout the organization. Debbie Chang is a volunteer with CCL, has been active since Earth Day 2017. Debbie's currently the group leader of the Alabama Huntsville chapter located on the traditional lands of the Cherokee and Chickasaw peoples. In addition to her role as group leader, Debbie serves as the Climate and Environmental Justice Action Team Steering Committee member and People of the Global Majority Caucus member. So she wears many hats, and we're so glad to have Debbie as one of the biggest boosters of transformational organizing throughout the whole network. And if we've done our job well, you're going to walk away with the following 3 learning goals tonight. We're going to have the chance to highlight the pillars of transformational organizing to help each of us strengthen our leadership development. We're going to also walk through why each of these pillars is important in building capacity through our organization and how we really can do that. And then we're going to ask you to take some actions with us. We're going to have some interactive chat questions. We're going to have some prompts that you can take back to your chapter after tonight to put into practice, making sure that each of these pillars you can try out and test out with your local group. So with that, our agenda is really straightforward. We're going to talk about all 5 pillars. We'll start with the pyramid of engagement. We'll then talk about the CCL Way. We'll transition then to talking about the conditions that motivate, and then we'll discuss the elimination of blame and the empowerment of volunteers, throughout which time you are welcome to put any questions, comments, ideas in the chat. We'll have an ample 10-15 minutes at the end for Q&A discussion, and Debbie and I will alternate with each of these pillars so that you don't get sick of hearing one of our voices alone. So without further ado, though, we are so glad you're here. Thanks so much for being here, and I will pass it to you, Debbie.
Thanks, Brett. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here sharing my favorite thing that I've learned from my years at CCL. So I'd like to start a lot of my CCL presentations by looking back to CCL's mission statement. CCL exists to create political will for climate solutions. And we do that by enabling individual and collective breakthroughs in the exercise of personal and political power. So inspire breakthroughs in personal and political power. What does that mean? Understanding power is a critical thing for people who want things to change. I for power defined as the ability to influence and compel others to do what you want them to do. And if our legislators aren't doing what we want, it might be because we're not that powerful yet of constituents. So how do we build that power to make them listen to us? So to me, CCL is about transformational organizing. Transformational organizing means transforming a person from a concerned bystander to a citizen, from a CCL member to a volunteer to an activist to citizen lobbyist and then a leader. So if you think about the word grassroots in grassroots organizing, think about how grass propagates by taking on new roots and growing. So by growing new leadership, you can lead more people, and that's how you build more power. I've been in CCL for 6.5 years, and hands down, my favorite thing about being here and also what gives me the most hope for climate change is bringing volunteers up and inspiring them to be leaders in their own right. I've grown a ton as a leader, and it's helped me grow the number of things that I can do, that my chapter can do, and that our organization can do. So I hope that you're here today so that you can also grow political will and collective power, and by inspiring and growing leaders in your own chapter. Now, something I love hearing in CCL are people repeating the phrase, wow, I never thought I could do that before. And I think this description of transformational organizing speaks to CCL's secret sauce. Community organizing is all about raising expectations and building power. So in CCL, we transform what people think is possible for themselves to accomplish. And collectively, we transform what people think is possible for Congress to do on climate. Regardless of the motivation or skills that a person brings when they join CCL, We succeed when we help them take their next step as part of our movement. Empowered volunteers help us reach our big organizational goals. So let's pause here for a moment for a little bit of interaction and remember why we're here instead of anywhere else, doing anything else. Why are we doing it at CCL instead of any other organization? So please share your answers to this in the chat. And to give myself an example, I'm here because I believe that CCL has the capability to build the power for climate movement, and because I like, respect, and believe in the people involved, including everyone here in this room. And not least of all, I appreciate what CCL has given me, that CCL has given me the training and the tools and empowered me to be a part of the action as engaged citizen. So what excites you about CCL? Okay, Danielle says, CCL makes me feel like I can make a difference. Henry says, I believe in personal power. Everyone can contribute. Great. Stuart says, civil, respectful dialogue. Lynn says, we've nailed it. So that's great. Beth says, one of the most remarkable things about CCL that hooked me and keeps me going is the trust that they place in the volunteers. There's awesome volunteers taking action, seeing the progress from that action, core values, the people who are working with me, and so on and so forth. So I'm super glad you guys are here and learning with me. All right, so let's dive into the first pillar of transformational organizing, the pyramid of engagement. So let's start at the base. At any organization's foundation are joiners. These are the people who have joined CCL's mailing list, and they're the members of our chapter rosters. They might attend large public events that you advertise. Maybe they're in a busy stage of their life, they can't volunteer till a later season. I myself was aware of CCL for about a few years before I actually joined the mailing list. Maybe they're leaders in a different group and they won't have time to go beyond reading emails from CCL. Next, we've got task doers. At the second level, our volunteers take actions without taking responsibility for their outcomes. So they might do specific, discrete tasks that you ask or assign them to do. They might show up to table, they might join a letter to the editor party, volunteer to bring food or support an event, write a letter or call Congress. I love these volunteers. And then as volunteers move to become the role takers, the third step on the pyramid, they take on more responsibility and ownership of an outcome. So they might be a task role taker. So it could be as simple as taking a few tasks off of your plate as a chapter leader or a chapter veteran. Maybe they'll take responsibility for booking your meeting room each month or posting the monthly agenda or take attendance and log it. It could be as critical as being the chapter liaison to the congressional manager, social media manager, calling campaign mobilization managers. So think of any roles that you currently do that you could train and coach and inspire someone else to share and then take on. And you might, as again, support with them as a coach for a while. So one of my best volunteers in my old chapter in DC, she was a woman named Leslie, whose role was to host our chapter meetings in her home. So on paper, she didn't do a lot of activism activities like tabling or writing letters or lead events. But every time somebody walked through her door, she took a moment to greet them warmly, ask about their day, their commute. She offered drinks and snacks, and then she led them to the living room where the meeting was. Leslie was the primary reason that our new members felt as welcomed in our chapter as they did. So she may not be doing advocacy actions, but her role as hostess was absolutely invaluable as a part of our chapter strengths. So I want to encourage you to value people who are doing anything in your chapter. So I mentioned role takers for individual actions. There's also role takers for events, and it could overlap with the leaders level. So maybe they'll plan an event, coordinate with venues, organize materials, and recruit volunteers. I might call this a point person for an event to attract a fresh leader who doesn't want a leader level. So these are great stepping stones to leadership because they are finite events that have an end date. This event has an end date. So that gets us to leaders. I love leaders. Leaders can lead a committee or an action team. As leaders, they support other volunteers. Maybe they're the tabling coordinator and they recruit tablers. Maybe they host the letter to the editor parties each month. And then there's a secret level at the top, leadership developers. So what's the difference? A leadership developer looks for ways to replace themselves as leader. They coach other people into doing what they do. They share their power. They invite people to move up the period of engagement and support them in building the skills and removing the barriers to do so. So these are the organizers that grow the movement. And these are the organizers that make CCL and any movement great. So I have a confession to make. In the last few years, I've learned how much I love power. I love power. but I love the movement more. So for the movement to have power, I've had to learn to share my power with others and trust others to take control and ownership and leadership so the power can multiply more than with me alone. And I want to emphasize again how important each role is, how completely valid it is for some people to communicate that their level of engagement is for CCL is joiner. I want to find and offer opportunities for joiners and task doers to move up, but I don't want to pressure them because I assume that I know their capacity better than they do. Um, so if you're a small chapter of mine, maybe you don't have as much time to support the joiners as I would like. I spend my time primarily focusing on the top half of the pyramid. But a few times a year, we do try to make sure that there are joiner-friendly activities or actions so that they can feel included. So maybe it's a film, maybe it's a large event or social gathering. So basically something that reinforces the glue that holds chapter relationships together. And everyone's important. Everyone's motivations, needs, capacities are different. So what can we do to find each person's unique interaction? And the bad news first, the first thing to know, there's not really a shortcut to cultivate a leader for most ordinary volunteers. It's effort. But think back to the reason you mentioned earlier that you're here, and hopefully you'll agree that it's worth the effort. So let's get into some of the ways to build that effort. Brett.
That sounds great. I love that. And thanks for kicking us off so perfectly, Debbie. I can already feel the energy on this guide being lived out through the way that you're presenting it. So that was the first pillar, right? And we put that there at the first position because of the importance of cultivating leadership. The second pillar within CCL is our culture collectively. When someone joins CCL, they have lots of questions. We all did, right? When we first started, when we meet, to how our legislative proposal works, how we take action. At the same time, they also learn how we work together from the moment they first contact us. And we are communicating that culture of our organization. People are deciding and discerning in each step whether this is an organization that fits for them, whether this is a place that they want to stay. And we should teach people about our culture, what we're calling here the CCL Way, as deliberately as we teach them how to lobby or write a letter to the editor. So let's do another reflective activity. And we can put this again in the chat. I'll put a couple of these prompts here so you can have the chance to kind of think about them with us. What is the purpose of being an activist? What does it mean in your mind to be organized or to be an organizer? What does it mean to have power? For us, part of that is the ability to mobilize. When you make a recommendation or a training or an event, do your team members take your recommendation? When you ask them to boost your event to their email lists or social media or friends, will they? When it's time to call or write to their member of Congress, will they do that when you ask them to? And more importantly, zooming out, what are the factors that would make you take action that somebody else has asked you to do for another cause, for another group? So let's reflect on this and really be able to kind of think for each of you what that looks like and the how behind it. Henry shares, what does it mean to have power? The ability to change things in the world. I love that simple definition. Lynn shares this. To be an activist is to strive to cause positive action by others. Oh, these are so good. Keep them coming here. Stuart shares the wonderful definition behind purpose, promoting a specific goal and energizing others to assist. Mike shares his definition of power can mean the confidence to challenge your limits. Ooh, I love that. Pushing you outside your comfort zone or what you thought were your limits, in parentheses. So well put. Linda shares purpose of being an activist is to drive change that you believe in. We can keep these coming. I'll just read Ben's here and then move on, but keep typing if you've been putting down your words too. We want to share and learn from each other. Ben writes, being organized is to be able to work towards a goal in an efficient manner. Thank you. I'll read Sam's here. You snuck this in perfect time. So to fulfill your purposes, Sam writes, you must commit to your goals. To organize yourself, you must know your goals, and to have power, you must have the drive. These are so good. I think that these should all be kind of written as new koans. I think we should have like a new meditation book here based on tonight's reflections. All right, so obviously all of you in your own words are putting to term really what we're trying to get at here. And this is a phrase that I love that Debbie taught me. People will come to us for the cause, but they stay and do the work for the community. And that is all about you. One way to help people get invested in our community that we're creating together is to make sure their work and their opinions are valued. When Google researchers, for an example, did an internal study on their working teams, they noticed two behaviors. that all of the good teams generally shared. On the good teams, members spoke in roughly the same proportion. And on some teams, everyone spoke during each task. On others, leadership shifted among teammates from assignment to assignment. But in each of these cases, by the end of the day, everyone had had the chance to speak roughly the same amount. As long as everyone got the chance to talk, the researchers wrote the team did well. The way this manifests in CCL chapters often is that when there's an event, tabling, for example, I ask the newest volunteers to recap the event, specifically asking for the organizers and leaders to only lead stifles the ability for others to feel that engagement. So having new peer volunteers talk about the event tells other newer volunteers what it was like from their perspective, and that builds ownership in the process and models that their work is valued. And if there's holes in the recap, other people can fill them in collectively, right? That's just a great chance for us out of many examples to think about what we can do to really kind of reinforce that CCL way. One of the core pieces within our transformational organizing with that second pillar is our core values, which you can find on our website at any point. Here's a link to it in the chat. And we'll get into this in just a little bit, but one of the most powerful ways that I've heard and seen and modeled in our own chapter that really kind of gets at our CCL way is designating each month's chapter meeting to explore right at the top of your meeting, or fitting it into your agenda whenever is best for you, a chance to explore how one of these values comes to life with your chapter. What is it about your chapter, your community, your city that has optimism, or being nonpartisan, or having integrity in place, and having that chance to talk about it as an open group? Just a wonderful expression and a natural way to really embody CCL's values that bind us all together. So let's talk a little bit more about the second pillar, the CCL way, and really some of the ways to cultivate power in your groups. You can also put in the chat, please, at this point, what are some of the ways that your chapter passes on culture to our new volunteers? And I think really right off the bat, it's important to acknowledge that there's no one right way. There's no single path to organize or lead effective teams or to really designate that CCL way. However, in the same way that today's talk on what feels right to me may not feel the same right way for you, what feels right for you may not be the right for the people you lead. And one important thing about being a leader is allowing space for people who are different from you to also thrive. How can you cultivate that and welcome people from that very first moment, like what Debbie highlighted, the experience in her DC chapter with Leslie's welcoming experience was being done across those people coming in. Debbie also shared that as co-leader in the DC chapter and the other co-leader had different leadership styles, the advantage is that they were able to play with others, each other's strengths, play off of that, and support each other with areas that they maybe were less interested in or didn't feel like they were as well versed. And having that diversity is key too. So one of the big things that we always talk about is show versus tell, not just talking about the CCL way, but really modeling that. And that really is, I think, a key learning across each of our chapters. How can we show or model that way within our culture rather than just talking about it too? And we'd love to know in the chat, really what's helping you transmit CCL values in your chapter. What else do you do? But what we're going to do is just populate here on the screen a slide with 8 recommendations, different things that people have found that we've put in our guide that you can try out in your own group too for the CCL way. Number 1, appoint a culture builder. Have somebody designated, just like we have a media manager or a welcome team leader, who's in your chapter that is maybe already the keeper of the culture. How can they make sure each month that CCL way is infused, especially for our new volunteers, to really kind of resonate throughout the group? Number 2, giving people a chance to talk about what they care about during an opening or closing exercise. We do this with Connect Before content, bringing in our lived experience even outside of our shared climate organizing, getting to know each other in our own real lives. But you can do it in other ways too. Ask someone to briefly share something that they did that models the CCL way, or ask someone to share a story from the group's history, from their own chapter's background, or CCL's history. Those are great prompts for number 3 and 4. Number 5, use quotes to say who we are. If you've got a particular favorite phrase on one of our web pages, or you see something powerful that somebody wrote in the kind of forum that you belong to in the last month. For example, I know that Alex Mariani's speech the last couple of months was resonating for chapters to kind of read out and share about his own reflections as a CCL leader. Those are great examples to really fold in and have people listen and then reflect back how they're reacting. Number 6, convey your culture by integrating it into what your group does compared to telling people what to do or how to be. That's that whole show versus tell element. And I think a key piece of this lies in the work that we do in our chapters, emphasizing within our grassroots outreach work is the importance of service. How can we be involved in the community, showing up to other parallel causes and making sure that our team members are also building those connections throughout the places that we live? Number 7, creating opportunities for people to get to know each other better, having that chance outside of a formal chapter meeting structure, whether it's social mixers or other events that you can have outside of that once monthly meeting. And number 8, inventing fun traditions for your group. This is in particular what we want to learn tonight. Are there any fun traditions out there that we may not have heard of yet about what your chapter does to really be able to embody that CCL way? One example we have here is a group creating commercials to demonstrate each value being lived out in their group. It's entirely okay to be creative and silly in this process, and I definitely love this idea. All right, so feel free to keep putting those in the chat. I love seeing kind of some of the examples that people are putting out there. And without further ado, let us continue with our third pillar. Debbie, I'll pass back to you.
Where am I? I just posted Alex Mariani's speech into the chat. So it's one of my favorite speeches we've had at CCL. Okay, so the third pillar of transformational organizing. So this pillar has some of the most useful tips in this presentation. Transformational organization is one in which conditions are right for people to motivate themselves, and how well volunteers perform stems from what motivates them in the first place. So what drives individual motivation? So the proper question is not how can you motivate other people, but rather how can we create the conditions within which others will motivate themselves? As a transformational organization, CCL places citizen empowerment as key to our mission and strategy. So we encourage leadership by all volunteers in order to match the size of the problem that we're tackling. But often people feel that their time or skills are up to the task. So to support volunteers as they move up the engagement pyramid, it's essential to inspire people and help remove obstacles that hold them back. Cultivating agency, meaning helping people reach their potential as leaders by developing skills and confidence. So there's direct motivators that strengthen engagement, and then there's indirect motivators, which may be effective in the short run, but decrease long-term engagement. So let's start with what doesn't in the long term. Something that comes quite naturally to us because it's often quite effective for the short term. Next slide. Indirect motivators decrease long-term engagement. So for example, emotional pressure. So people are motivated when they're doing something to avoid guilt, shame, or other negative feelings. Maybe they don't want to disappoint or they're avoiding blame. Here's 3 ways to reduce emotional pressure in your group. So let's prioritize the things that people want to do and enjoy doing. Drop ideas that no one's enthusiastic about, and do more of the things that increase the play motive. We'll get back to that. There's inertia, working out of habit. It can be a motivator when you actually can't identify why you're doing the work. So remember earlier how we asked you, like, what brings you to CCL? Why are you doing that? If you incorporate a lot of that into your chapters, practices, like, why does CCL exist? Remind people to reflect on that themselves. So ways to prevent or inertia in your group: provide time to reflect on activities, including prioritizing improving those activities, and look for ways to determine to measure outcomes so that progress can be determined. So understanding what motivates people to participate in CCL will help us have more engaged, higher functioning, and passionate and healthier teams. So let's go into the positive motivators. Play, purpose, potential, also known as fun, function, and future. Find work that you enjoy. People feel a sense of play at work when the motive is the work itself. So you work because you enjoy it. Because the play motive is created by the work, play is the most powerful motivator. It also means giving people the ability to experiment, to create, to follow their curiosity, even to fail, as it allows them to learn from these experiences. So to foster the play motive, ask people what they're excited about doing and encourage them to do that. Provide time to reflect on progress and consider next step. Celebrate successes and honor failed attempts. You have to believe in the greater outcome. So someone who is motivated by purpose is not motivated by the work itself, but because they value the outcome of the activity. So purpose is the second strongest motivator. So For example, a teacher motivated by purpose may not necessarily love teaching or any of those creative skills, things that feel like play, but they believe in the outcome and the purpose. Member of Congress motivated by purpose may believe first and foremost in serving the interests of his or her constituents. So to foster the purpose motive, help your team see how their work is connected to the larger outcome that they value. And take the time to highlight stories of how other social movements have wrestled with their effectiveness before they achieved their goals. Last, potential, the work as a step towards other goals. So people who are motivated by potential see the work as a stepping stone to something else. They do an activity because it may lead to other personal goals. They're invested in the work as an investment in the future. So for example, I take my own small steps at CCL because I think it will build political power enough to get Congress to take the larger step of enacting climate legislation. That's the potential I'm looking for. So to foster the potential motive, learn about people's personal goals and needs. Match them with tasks or roles that help them achieve those future goals, and co-create with them a plan to develop the abilities they're most interested in cultivating for their own future skill set. So here's a fabulous exercise from Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. It can help anyone find their individual, unique role in the climate movement. When you speak to individual volunteers, and generally speaking, for me, this is a follow-up conversation. So after they've been coming around for a few months and they haven't established themselves anywhere. This is the climate action Venn diagram. How a specific person can help with climate solutions. So this is your bespoke way to help address. What are you good at? Ask them to think about their skills, resources, and networks. What's your areas of expertise? Who and what do you have access to? What do you bring to the table? What's the work that needs doing? Think about system level change. Are there particular climate and justice solutions that interest you? Maybe starting a composting program, protecting forests, getting climate candidates elected. There's options in CCL, and that is generic climate action. And what brings you joy and satisfaction? What gets you out of bed in the morning? So don't pick things that make you miserable and will burn you out. This is for the long haul. It's a marathon. Find things that enliven and energize you. So remember this earlier slide. The only way you're going to discover any individual's unique motivation is to talk with them and to listen to them. People can fill out surveys for you, but those are only tools and they're starting points. It's like a resume. Very few employers will hire on a resume alone, because only a conversation can tell the whole picture. So keep having those one-on-one conversations. But what about in general for the group? Let's see. So here's some actual advice and tips. What are the tangible ways to build those relationships? Get people in contact with each other so they can develop those relationships. Like at the conference, we build in the break times and the meals where we can talk to each other, cultivate the skills, the motivations, and civic capacities to take on greater roles and not just technical support. And then provide a wide range of cognitive, technical, emotional, and motivational coaching. We'll have a little more on that in a minute. And why we do this? People who socialize or work together independently are more likely to be committed to their work. If they work alone, there's a greater burden on the work to be more intrinsically motivating. So I think this is true for most of us who's here in this room, that the work is intrinsically motivating for us. But for others, if they tire, there's no other mechanism to maintain their commitment to CCL. And that's why I found CCL conferences so motivating and helpful. And one of the reasons that my despair on climate did a 180 into optimism after meeting the people at my first June conference. Some more ways: cultivate social events, social political events, not just political action events, so that people get a chance to talk and build friendship. So smaller group committee meetings, get to know each other as individuals more. You can work in teams, even pairs, have those one-on-ones. And some people use this method without even realizing they are. So it's very effective. The other advantage of one-on-ones is that the individual approach tends to work better for introvert organizers and leaders. So they prefer to take the time to think deeper and quieter and to know individuals versus presenting to your group. So if you have any introverts in your chapter, this is a big advantage that they've got, where they tend to be better at asking questions and listening for the answers. I have been learning that skill as an extrovert. So it's been a challenge that I've grown a lot in the last few years. On a practical level, the people that you've built relationships with are the people who are more likely to partner with you on your activities. So I know a lot of the people in this room are here because I invited you, right? So that's the kind of relationships help that your relationships will do for the actions that you want them to take. And again, each person's motivation is probably different. In the slide deck for this, I've also linked to bibliography of where I found some skills and ideas for, including things like one-on-ones.
Many of you here tonight know the amazing work that our regional director of the Greater Pacific Northwest, Tamara Staden, also does as her role as our education and resilience coordinator. But one of those resources that she has created for CCLers is focused here is called How to Enjoyify Your Zoom Meetings. We put a link to it in the chat. And this really, we highly recommend Tamara's videos on supportive coaching. Just search, for her name or her resources on community if you're looking. And everyone can have the chance to incorporate play in your activist work. She gives you a lot of great examples on how to make this fun. How do you fuel the people for doing their work? Well, we've said it again and again on this training already about the importance of play. You're much more likely to engage in activity that's fun, whereas sometimes you'll let slide a volunteer activity that's purposeful or has potential or feels more stoic or staid. So let's think about some ways that you can jump into that. And we don't have time tonight to try these out, but check them out in your own time and enjoyify your meetings for that play motivator. So thank you all so much already. We've got two more pillars, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And I would just preface this fourth pillar by saying it's probably, at least for me, personally, the one that's the most surprising or the one that might feel the most counterintuitive as far as at first blush, why is this in here? Why is this kind of equivalent with the other four? And again, I think you'll see at the end of it why this importance of focusing on eliminating blame is so key, but it's very subversive or hard to see kind of in its role with each of our lives. So let's kind of unpack how CCL is trying to tackle it and why that's so important. So some of you may have heard of this concept called the blame bias, but basically, despite all that we know about how to motivate people that Debbie just reviewed very succinctly with those three indirect motivators that we're trying to avoid and the three direct ones that we really want to lean into as leaders, from the decades of social science research, we actually don't have a lot better functioning organizations and workplaces still. And it turns out, believe it or not, that human beings have a tendency to blame other people when things aren't going well. Imagine that, rather than the context or the conditions within which they operate. And this basic concept, phenomenon that I'm sure each of you is intimately familiar with, is called the blame bias. The blame bias isn't actually hardwired, though. That's the thing. And by understanding it, we can help eliminate it and root it out from wherever it might be present within our own lives and the organizing that we're doing. Typically, we're more aware of the blame bias in other people than ourselves. Fancy that as well. So, the first place, and often the hardest place to start, is learning to recognize when we ourselves have fallen into blaming people. And once we've recognized it, we can choose to replace with blaming with problem solving and modeling, again, that whole showing versus telling in our own work with the culture that we're building within CCL. Not surprisingly, blaming the individual leads to a greater use of those motivators that just had the review that Debbie showed as indirect motivators that weaken motivation and performance. For example, managers or leaders fall into using emotional pressure to shame somebody, or they use economic pressure to create financial incentive or disincentivize the promoted, desired behavior. However, by focusing on the conditions or the individual's context, we can instead increase the likelihood of self-motivation and learning from our own mistakes. Rooting out the blame bias improves our relationships and effectiveness, both in our chapters and in our lobbying. And for example, when a volunteer fails to do a job they've agreed to do, we can blame them, shut down progress or communication, or we can treat it as a problem to be solved together. Co-create solutions, leave everyone more empowered as a result. That's a perfect example that comes up every month in our chapters. Problem solving leads to a sense of playful experimentation, which is one of those highest motivators Debbie just reviewed. Similarly, and this might be even harder or more of a stretch for some of us on the line, we could blame our member of Congress when they don't share our urgency about climate change or support the proposals we're asking as our primary ask. But that attitude only locks in our differences in place. If instead we focus on understanding their situation, what the barriers are for making progress towards moving in the direction we hope they can, even small changes in that context can lead to significant progress over time. And we've seen that in office over office in CCL. So we can begin creating conditions in which members of Congress feel more internally motivated to take action on climate change, linking their values to our issue, finding trusted messengers that they listen to, creating visible support from constituents. You name it, all of this ties directly back to the blame bias. And the key tool that we have in the Transformational Organizing Guide that helps us engage in problem solving without falling into the trap of this blame bias is a simple method that we like to call the REAP model. So let's think about what REAP looks like by actually describing it. It's an acronym that we've highlighted right here. Remember, explain, ask, and plan. We reap what we sow. So let's apply this to an example. A volunteer doesn't do what she or he said that they would. Quite often, we feel frustrated. We blame the volunteer. They don't live up to their commitments. We feel pulled into thinking of them as lazy, irresponsible, untrustworthy, or some other combination of character flaws. Instead, let's try to reap together. All right, number one, remember, assume positive intent. Maybe there are reasons that another bad character to explain why they didn't do the task other than their bad character that they agreed to do. Maybe they are actually a good person who faced some difficulty that we haven't yet found out and taken the time to understand. E, explain possible alternative scenarios. Brainstorm in your own mind some other explanations for the behavior, such as something unanticipated happened in their life that had to be handled instead. They found it hard to say no when asked to do something and said yes to something they shouldn't have. They don't know actually how to even start the task yet. Or they started feeling about not having competency around it when they got into it and went into hiding. You name it, all of these scenarios have happened, and that's really the E in starting to understand. And you can also co-create here. If you're already at this stage as a leader, rather than just assuming these explanations yourselves, jumping into a conversation with that volunteer to help them explain and think through together is really key. That way you're not doing any of this work alone and really co-creating and understanding the underlying context. A, ask. Assuming positive intent, mention what you've observed and ask why by asking a question to draw out more information. For example, something like, I noticed that you haven't been able to get to this task yet, and I just wanted to take the time to check in one-on-one on what might be going on, what's in the way, what we could do about it. For you, what do you think has made it hard to get to this so far? You use it, your own words, but again, having the chance to ask and engage in discussion on your observations. And then finally, P for plan, identifying the true root cause and developing a plan to remedy it. Do they need information, moral support, a partner? Do they need to be allowed to back out and find a new person to take this on? You can come up with a plan together and remedy and address it rather than blaming somebody and moving on. So really, in conclusion, assuming that key element of positive intent counteracts the blame bias. It's the most important skill within this fourth pillar. Assuming positive intent allows us to adopt a problem-solving approach instead of feeling defensive. People who get help overcoming their own barriers can then go on to trying new actions, expanding their own comfort zone, and feeling good about engaging with your chapter and their contributions. A key intervention that each of us can play in our leadership.
Thanks. So there's not a formula for empowering people, if only it was so easy, but we have pulled together some things we can do to help people develop their capacity and commitment to action, doing things together, helping people determine a role for themselves, and checking in periodically. So those are some things that can lead to greater engagement by our members. So chapter meetings are really good for joiners and task stewards. It's our largest regular attendance, got a high volume of new people. So if new people friendly describes how you'd like your new chapter meetings to be, consider different outside team meetings for the organizers and leaders and role takers. The organizers and leaders are the ones who come up with the tasks for the joiners and taskers. So this is where you create the sign-in sheets, think through the mental load of putting together event or activity, the agenda, and ask others to join you. The more organizers we've got doing this, the more events and actions that those joiners and taskers can take. And then the more joiners and taskers we can accommodate with them. And the easier it is for our chapter to build a movement. So doing things together, although setting people up to work alone on tasks can be fast and efficient and often feels easier, in the long run, research shows that people engage more deeply over time when they're working together. You don't have to be rigid about this. It's just strengthens your group to ask people to work in pairs or teams. Co-leaders can keep the work from becoming overwhelming, provide support and accountability to each other. Adding a second person to a job or role enables more people to gain useful skills and experience and creates a backup for when your point person has a time conflict or life crisis. So most activities I do, I like to ask the veteran person to bring on a new person with them up the ladder. So you've got always a veteran and a newbie or recently person to do the events. You start with tasks and then you move to roles. So people come into the organization at different levels. So ideally have a system for getting to know newcomers and finding out more about what they want to offer the group. Many people want to start out with a simple task they can do. So help newcomers leave your meeting with a clear and easy next step for themselves. Go home and learn how to log into Community. Write your member of Congress this week. And then after a few months of doing tasks, it's time to start thinking about them, have them with the outcomes that they want to work for and the role they want to play in that. And as you get to know your members, you can be listening for what they like, propose a possible role to them, or you can ask them to think up what role they want to play. In other words, creating roles for your members is a collaborative process of matching up what the group needs and what the people in it are attracted to doing. So when people are doing the things they enjoy, believe in, or want to improve at, and they're motivated by play, purpose, and potential, the most powerful motivators, those feelings of growth and fulfillment can become contagious in your group. So I want to say everything I've learned in life, I learned from watching Star Trek. You have here two TV shows, Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The first job of a nonprofit leader, that includes everyone here, is to find your replacement. The measure of a good leader is not how many followers you have, but how many leaders you create. So in The Next Generation, there's a joke about how long the first officer remained the first officer, like years and years and decades. Whereas in the second one, the shorter fellow he's talking to was a juvenile delinquent in the first episode. And by the end of season 7, he was a decorated war hero. And it was partly because of the leadership of the leaders in that group. So Star Trek, everything, answer to everything. So coaching check-ins, check in with your people. Supporting the people in your group doesn't have to take hours of your time, but it is essential. So when someone's first getting to know CCL, having a guide or mentor is really helpful to them, and it communicates that their participation is valued. I've seen an organization like book where it says people notice, like, when people were surveyed about why they left an organization, the answer would often be, I don't think anybody cared whether I stayed or left. So it's really helpful to people to periodically reflect on how it's going, solve problems, and figure out the next steps, and know that somebody cares about them. I can also say anecdotally, a lot of the people I've talked to about why they stayed in CCL, somebody spoke to them early on and chatted with them and welcomed them. So the real human interaction is really useful. So this is a role that someone who enjoys empowering other people might love to take on. Could be as simple as asking someone at the beginning of the meeting or the end of the meeting, how's it going? As chapter host, is there anything you need? And you can create a more systematic approach. Plan to call your most important role takers regularly to check in with them. Monthly or quarterly call to your team members or your committee chairs, that can make a huge difference. So a check-in calls like coaching. There's a couple of trainings and community on coaching. So a quick review is provided below. 3 interconnected domains: motivation, providing encouragement, getting over discouragement. Why didn't anyone come to my meeting? Helping people articulate their commitment to their objectives. Skills, helping people decide if they have the skills they need to accomplish their objective. What resources, including people, can you connect them with? Strategy, identifying a clear path for achieving goals and making a plan of action. So in a coaching conversation, you're doing these 3 things. You're finding a way to fulfill the need and then coming back to reflect on how things went. Ask your open-ended questions. How are you feeling about your progress on, is there anything you need to be able to be as effective as possible? And listen for what kind of support is needed and think together about how to meet that need. Maybe encourage them to think it through so that you're not solving it for them, but they can solve it for themselves. And each of these strategies relies on developing and nurturing relationships between people in a group. What are CCL's core values, right? And here's a quote from Maya Angelou. People don't care how much you know and what you want to share with them until they know how much you care. They forget what you say. They won't forget how you made them feel. How did you make them feel? I can tell you here in one of my chapters, when they said goodbye, they said, I feel like you've given me skills not just to be an activist, but to be a person, and that you really cared about me as a person. So and on the topic of how to keep and engage members, this is my secret favorite thing that I tell everyone. At the end of our monthly meetings, our chapter members like to give recognitions and share gratitude. So we plant a seed at the top of the meeting and explain in order to give folks a chance to think about it. And we'll give an example. So remember at the beginning, I talked about Leslie, our hostess. I know that it was valued because people would thank her for it at the end of those first meetings. So we open the floor up to gratitudes, popcorn style. People take turns whenever they want to and jump in. And usually someone in leadership is ready to go with 1 or 2. I do privately ask our leaders to thank intermediate and new volunteers. New and intermediate volunteers then have the opportunity to thank the leaders. So the idea is to reflect the light of praise with a mirror and create more light. So the tabling wasn't just a success because the person organized it. It was a success because of everyone who came to the team, who came and brought cookies just to help keep team morale. So it's like, it's noticed, it's appreciated, it makes a difference. Please keep it up. So I'm hopeful that this is a way to make the CCL work, something that fills your cup rather than work that is draining. We've got a lot of notes in here, and there's also a bibliography of where I found some of these ideas. So I sometimes run long. I talk a lot, and I drop a lot of things in chapter meetings. Like we don't finish introductions, maybe we don't do our dance break, or we don't get around to the whole agenda. But we always end each meeting with gratitudes, because this has changed. When we started doing this in my last chapter, I think it changed the culture of our chapter to be one that was more grateful and more accommodating for the team. So one detail of Dr. Haru Han's discoveries that we talked about in the beginning has to do with reflection. Why? Why are we activists? Why are we volunteering for CCL? How does what we do fit into the larger picture? In her book, high engagement groups not only provide the tools to train their volunteers and support their efforts, but they also have a formal process to reflect. And it helps your individual volunteers understand the results of your individual effort and the context, so that your work is meaningful and they have reason to continue on. It also includes feedback to the chapter leadership, so that the leadership can adjust their strategy to better fit the membership that they have. So can I ask you to go to the chat one last time and talk about when any of the activities that you've done with CCL have had particular impact or meaning for you? If you haven't felt that with any CCL actions, that's totally understandable, if you're new especially. So can you talk about either what you think would have had value for you, or maybe something you've done for another org that you felt was meaningful? I should put that in the chat. Okay. What's something you've done at CCL that has had particular impact or meaning for you? Meeting with my member of Congress. It was definitely meaningful because I was like, oh, they have to listen to us. And I feel like I'm actually talking to a decision maker rather than circling with, the people in despair about climate. I feel like I'm actually doing something. Leading climate advocate training, definitely, because then you're bringing new people to the movement. I'll take one more. Just getting started in learning. Learning is definitely one of the ways I started with CCL, and I was just really grateful to have the tools that I don't think a lot of other groups give you. So I love these. Keep them coming in. I think this is really meaningful. So here is a little graph that's found in Hari Han's book. And you can see the people in the center of the graph, and they're inspiring a person who's leading another circle, and they're inspiring more people, like when they're talking to grassroots outside. So I want you to think about how you can organize organizers rather than organizing events. So my ask for you today is to take the extra time to talk to volunteers, new and old, have those conversations, find out what their motivations and passions are. What's their why? And manage a little bit extra interpersonal tension, and ask folks to do things that they might not do on their own. Ask them to think, wow, I never thought I could do that before. If you take this extra time to do this, hopefully you'll be a little less busy trying to organize events by yourself, because there's more active members sharing the load. Share these lessons and activate the volunteers that you talk to into becoming organizers themselves for CCLs and the climate mission. And with these practices, organizers can inspire people to take on greater levels of activism, to grow our movement, and also to grow themselves.
I love it, Debbie. Well, to close, here is a review of our 5 pillars of transformational organizing. And again, keep in mind, CCL's guide to transformational organizing is not the last word or the only word on how to empower people, but hopefully it provides a useful framework that you can experiment with and build on with the examples that we've highlighted tonight. We trust you to try things out, see what works for you, and share your successes and failed attempts with others, so that we can keep on improving and growing and iterating to get better and better together. So on that note, to help continue the conversation, we've actually created a forum category on CCL Community. I just dropped the link in the chat. If you or any of your volunteers have experiences you'd like to share with the larger CCL network with transformational organizing, please feel free or encourage others to put that experience in the forum. If you've had an idea that worked well for your team, share it, and we look forward to continuing to deepen our effectiveness together as we learn from each other. Thank you for modeling that tonight so well, Tenny, in the chat. And to close us tonight, let's harken back to one of my favorite quotes from one of the books that we used to build out this guide in the first place over 6 years ago. A quote from Dr. Hari Hahn, from a veteran activist reflecting back on the power they experience organizing. Did you ever think that you could do that? Well, we hope that after tonight, you feel more grounded and ready to believe it's possible with your involvement in leadership too. So with that, Debbie and I are happy to stay on the line, and we'll open it up for Q&A. And we also understand if you have to drop and head off to the rest of your life. But again, thank you all so much for being here, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration.
Like what you hear? Recommend us to your friends and make sure to give us a 5-star rating. It helps us show up on other listeners' feeds. Feel free to pass on any suggestions for future episodes in the comments as well.
And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.